You will see a note come up. So if you've got your login details, please also mute yourself unless you're speaking, and we will have this recording available to those who are not able to join us. So thank you for everyone being part of this discussion, looking at research impacts and how we navigate that through our own respective journals, contributions of knowledge, and so on. Before we begin, I'll acknowledge the traditional owners on which we stand and meet, and acknowledging that leaders past, present, and future are also co-creating in this knowledge base, wherever they are, from indigenous knowledges and beyond. So today we have an exciting team of many editors-in-chief in one place. We have Professor Marianna Sigala, editor-in-chief of the Journal of Hospitality and Tourism Management, affiliated with Cathy. We've got Professor Alan Fyall, editor-in-chief of the Journal of Destination Marketing and Management. Professor Peter Kim, who is the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Hospitality and Tourism Research, and Professor Cathy, editor-in-chief of Tourism Management. So one of the things that we wanted to discuss in this forum was how we consider impacts of research and the greater discussion now on how it might benefit wider society other than our readership. And I'll pose this question as a reflective thought. Many of you may have had some time to dwell on this. So I might just start perhaps with Marianna to kick us off, and your thoughts on where we see research impacts and how we navigate this through the journal. Over to you, Marianna.
So Aaron, my quick suggestions, I always do, Zoom session, either class or any discussion. I ask, my students or all attendees to turn on, their camera so that we can talk to somebody, rather than just a blank. So yes, just respectfully, request, everybody here to
well said, Peter.
Identify yourself.
Well done. Thank you. And yes, if it is convenient or available to do so, please switch on your cameras. Marianna, did you like to?
Yes, thank you, Aaron.
Yeah.
Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm sure people are watching us from totally different time zones. It's Marianna Sigala, editor-in-chief for Journal of Hospitality and Tourism Management. I'm not sure if I'm going to say something different from what other editors are going to say, but our journal, it does place a great emphasis on the practical implications and the reasons why a study needs to be conducted and what lessons they're being learned by this. We always look for a section at the manuscript, particularly at the end of the paper, either to be titled Practical Implications or to be embedded within the conclusions or in a related section that you name it with an appropriate name. Now, what are we looking in this section called practical implications? I usually say we are looking for insights that they go beyond the statistical findings or the findings of a study. Yeah. So if, for example, you do a study whereby you have two variables, one affecting the other, giving an implication that based on the result, the manager should increase the one variable to achieve the other, as you can imagine, that's not sufficient. You should go beyond the most obvious observation and try to think more deeply why you have done the study. Now, having said that, as you can imagine, you need to be thinking about the practical implications at the beginning of designing a study, not when you have the result and you're trying to distill what insights and what suggestions you should be giving. Practical implications, or the value that the study needs to have, needs to be embedded in the purpose and the design of the study. You need to know more or less probably before you conduct the study, what is the question you're trying to answer and what type of guidelines you should be giving. Not really the answer of it, but the essence. There is another issue which I think somebody needs to think about. Practical implications, more or less, many studies have. Even studies that they do what we call replication studies. What do we mean by replication studies? It's the very simple basic study that somebody can do by taking a model, applying in a different context, and trying to find out whether it does apply in different countries, in different examples, in different situations. This can have a very good practical implication for a manager, but it might not be at the appropriate level of a study that we are looking for, Journal of Hospitality and Tourist Management. In JHTM, we're looking for studies that they make at the same time a theoretical contribution and a practical implication as well. So by saying practical implications, yes, we do want applied studies. We want studies that they give something valuable to the industry, but they also contribute something new to the theory. They either extend a model, they either make us think of a model or a framework in a new perspective, but they also have the practical implications. I don't think it's something easy that somebody can do. It's something that probably some people they can gain with experience or by reading many papers, but it's definitely something that we are looking on for papers. So theoretical implications and practical implications, they are the two major things that they are sought from our papers. And I think I'll stop here so I can leave the floor for some other editors to contribute. Thank you.
Thanks, Marianna. Alan, other than some of the points that Marianna has mentioned, were there specific areas that you would be looking for if you've seen done well through the manuscripts you've received over the years? Yeah,
and I'll add to what Marianna said. I agree 100% with what Marianna said. And actually, I was laughing to myself. I sat through a presentation about 2 years, actually, just before COVID, so about 3 years ago, from Rodolfo Baggio, that I'm sure many of you know, very, very talented researcher, does great work. And he was asked this question, how do you sort of enhance your contribution to practical implications? What are the management implications of his study? He says, I'm not a manager. If you want management implications, go ask a manager. I'm a scientist. And I actually disagreed with him, but I think it's a little bit of a generational view. His view was, I give you the science and then managers can interpret it accordingly. It's a view, it's not a view I share. But just to pick up on a theme, what Marianna mentioned, I think most of you, I think that the screen I'm looking at, most of you are very young, you're probably at the beginning of your journey. This, I think, is one of the hardest parts of your papers because Marianna touched upon it. You haven't necessarily got the experience of dealing with the industry, dealing with the destinations, dealing with the transportation providers, as much as once you get through your career. So it makes the management implications really quite hard because you're very good at your methods, you're very good at your techniques, but you get to the end of the paper, and I would say 90% of the papers I see for the Journal of Destination Marketing Management, this is definitely the worst section by far because you've run out of energy. You just want to press the submit button. So there's a very sort of trivial comment about the implications where it almost would be better if there's not a comment there at all. So what would I do? exactly what Marianna said. Try and think of the implications right at the very beginning of what you're doing. You won't know what the implications are, but you can think about possible implications, and they relate to the questions you're asking right at the very beginning of your study. So when you get to the end, you're not just rushing to get the paper through. It's a bit like a PhD dissertation. Normally the worst chapter is the conclusion, because everybody's just so tired. Okay, so really try and think at the very beginning what your contribution may be. Your findings may take you in a different direction, but if you've got good research questions, you've got a pretty good idea where that impact will be. And my best advice I can give, Aaron, and I was given this advice by Chris Cooper many moons ago, was really invest the time in those industry meetings, really invest time in meeting the associations, really invest those time in meetings and gatherings where you're not necessarily going to get a quick output, but it's networking, it's understanding, and just embracing the industry that is around you. And where I've lived in, many of you know, Bournemouth, Edinburgh, and obviously now in Orlando, I've always lived in places where the industry is very supportive of academics just turning up and learning. But it takes time, and you don't get an instant quick win, but longer term, it's absolutely priceless. So that learning, you know, it takes years in a way, but you become much better at understanding the dynamics, the complexities, the issues, which then contribute to real solid sort of theoretical and particularly management implications. But I would say, just to finish, think right at the beginning. I'm with Marianna. Try and think of those questions right at the outset, and have some indication of what those impacts may be before you even start.
Thanks, Alan. Obviously pointing us towards industry relations, the intentional design of some of the research impacts, and then that takes us to that obviously carefully worded practical implications and impact. Cathy, what have you noticed in your role and the kind of materials and papers that have come through? Are there areas that you would identify as valuable success areas for people keen to submit to tourism management, for example?
For tourism management, we actually ask for an impact statement in addition to the abstract. And very often, the impact statement comes in that is totally different from what we want the authors to do. Sometimes we see a cut and paste of identical abstract impact statement. That's not impact statement. Impact statement in the author's guideline and on the website, it says, what impact does your research make beyond academia? In other words, don't talk about theoretical contribution. Don't talk about developing a conceptual framework. We want the readers to see what actual real life impact this piece of research actually provide. So could be policy, could be management, could be operation. So we want to encourage scholars and our colleagues to think outside of the academia. What good can we do to the wider society? So that's the original intent of having an impact statement. And I understand it takes time for all of us to learn how to write something that's really meaningful for people outside of the scholarship community. So the thing that I see very often, unfortunately, agree with what Marianna and Alan have said. Very often at the end, then we see something under the practical implications that are basically personal opinions. Rather than coming from the study. When we read, okay, the manager should do this and this, but those ideas are not from the results of the study. Those are based on probably personal opinion or the literature. So if you can say something based on the literature, then why do you need to do the study, right? So all the implications should directly come from results of the study or based on results of the study. And the other thing that we very often see in a poorly structured practical implication section is that the statements are very generic, very broad. We would like to see specific implications. What can a reader from the industry, a practitioner, pick up the paper and say, oh, that's a good idea, I can go do that, right? Rather than just saying, oh, government should encourage tourism, government should encourage sustainable behaviors of their citizens. Or so we want to know specifically, if it's policy related, what specific areas of the policy can the government think about or can further develop? If it's HR related, what specific HR policy or practices you can recommend? So we're looking for specific recommendations generated based on results of the study. And then obviously the implications section will help generate an impact statement. An impact statement doesn't have to be managers read this, can do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Impact statement could include short-term impact, medium-term impact, and long-term impact. Even conceptual pieces could have impact beyond the academia. Why do we want to develop a conceptual piece? Because, for example, this concept has not been very well conceptualized, developed, or there's no model, no theory. But then why do we need a theory? Everything we do at the end should have some, if not short-term, medium and long-term impact. So I'll stop here for now.
Thank you, Cathy. And indeed, it will be a good reminder for us to look at existing impact statements to see how they've been framed or developed and help us inform potentially future work that's going across to the journals. Thank you for your insights. I'll shift now to Peter and get your thoughts on where impact and impact statements, or perhaps in the Journal of Hospitality and Tourism Research, are there areas that are slightly perhaps contextual or cultural? And if so, how do potential authors perhaps deal with topics like generalizability of the research? Peter.
Yeah, thank you, Aaron. I think as you know, Cathy, Marianna, and Ellen noted, it is very important to select, the topic which must be, practically relevant. And we JHTL last year, newly developed our motto. So we want to, publish research with impact. Impact is an acronym. It's I, innovative, M, meaningful, and P, practical relevant, and A, academically rigorous, C, cross-disciplinary, and T, theory focused. These are, what we mean by, impacts. So practically relevant is important, criterion when we assess quality of research, which submitted to, which is submitted to, JHTL. And the meaning of practically relevant, I would say, who cares? Or so what questions, right? That's fundamental issues. Some people say that, academically, rigorous or theoretically important topic might not be, practically relevant. My answer would be no. I think if, certain topic is, conceptually important, it must have a practical values and practically, relevant. So as Marianna pointed out, when research, study, or to design, any research, I think must be, aware of a practically relevant topic rather than documents or just, the textbook information or, very ongoing, just a very old or cliche, topic. So I had a look at, recent, publications in JHTL. There are several examples which has some practical values. And you have another question, how to conduct, research with the real world impact. So I want to know the answer. Everybody, in this, session want to know the answer, but that is no absolute rules or, the clear, simple answer for that. I think my approach would be, working with the, industry practitioners. I think my, PhD student or most colleagues of mine are working for research, collaborated with the industry practitioners, either, data collection or, different level of engagement with industry practitioners. So I think to conduct, research with the real world impact is not simple. There is no simple answer, but, in JHTL, given, my, observation, I cannot say, just a few or just a certain, paper has a practical value. I think all research must have a practical values or are practically relevant, but some extraordinarily, research paper, which has very interesting practical implication. It's not, I cannot generalize, but I can often see that, it's collaborated by practitioners who really understand what is needed in the industry. So I think, as Marianna pointed out, when we start, to conduct research, we select practically relevant topic, identifying gaps. Most of the research says, to identify gap, problem statement, right, from the literature. So I think from the industry, we need to identify gaps or problem. So I would say, it'll be interesting or it'll be, great to collaborate with the industry practitioners to identify gaps in the industry. That's, some, few thoughts of mine. Thank you, Aaron.
Thanks, Peter, for your input. And clearly having that industry immersion, as I call it, would be very important for us as to navigate this as well, especially more so in the last 3 years. Many papers have research on things like the pandemic implications and short, medium, long-term futures as well. So giving us some point to reflect on some of the work that we're doing. I'll move to invite comments from Professor Joseph Cheer, who's also co-editor-in-chief of Tourism Geographies. And one of the things that I've noted of Tourism Geographies is different platforms to advance impacts, and obviously could talk a bit about podcasting. And I wonder, in the length of a manuscript and the short portion of a section on practical implications, how has the idea come about, and where do you see, Joseph, for readers of the journal in terms of impacts and what you're doing with the journal?
Right. Thank you, Aaron, and thank you all. I'm sorry I arrived late. I had a conference panel that was overlapping this at the same time. But I didn't get to hear your introduction, Marianna, but I think the two questions that Aaron posed to us, I think, have been answered quite well. And I feel for researchers, there's a lot of pressure on impact. You must demonstrate impact. And really, I think, as Alan alluded to, impact takes time. It's not immediate. Most scholars would agree that it takes a good couple of years for a paper to gain momentum. Issues of what is the contribution to knowledge, what is the theoretical contribution, what are the practical contributions. There are all of these multiple exigencies that authors must consider. But I go back even further, and I often implore authors to look at the aims and scope of a journal in the first place, because irregardless of how well formed your question is and your research design is, if you're aiming your work at the wrong journal, you're likely to get an adverse impact. So I think that's also an important question in this. Aaron also flagged our attempts at Tourism Geographies to try and broaden the platform of readership for papers published in the journal. And yes, one of our recent initiatives was to start a podcast for papers published in the journal. And the idea is to open up the work to an audience, but also have readers hear what the author's comments are. We find now that a lot of academics are saying it's very useful for their students to listen to the podcast before they read it, read the article. And really, it's about engagement, right? When we talk about research impact, most of us know the colored donut that we see online when we read papers, the altmetrics donut, if you like. And that's a measure, a quantifiable measure of impact across a number of scales. For us, the podcast will help that. We hope that the podcast engages journalists, bloggers, policymakers in a way that's less confronting than, say, through reading a journal article. But one thing we also did prior to the podcast was an initiative titled Tourism Geographic, not National Geographic. We kind of stole the name a little bit. But Tourism Geographic is an online magazine where we get authors to write the conversation style articles from their published articles. That way it removes some of the barriers that limit people from accessing this knowledge. And we think that's particularly important. All of the issues about theory are important as well. And it reminds me of what the late David Harrison said once. He examined my PhD, and he He wrote a paper once titled, "What has theory ever done for us?" Right? Because we know that when we're trying to engage with industry, being able to, let's say, shove theory down their throats is a really difficult one, because a lot of them are really interested in what are the practical implications? How does this influence my business? How does this influence the industry? So one of the things that we try to do is get this research outside of the academic echo chambers, because if all we're doing is talking to each other and no one else is listening, then how are we indeed making impact to all of the communities outside of the journal, from the industry to community to policymakers and so on? And the last one, Aaron, the last point I make is how we speak to multiple audiences using different modes. I think that's a question authors need to ask.
What was the last one?
The last one out of that giant sea.
Just a reminder for people to mute their.
I think we were having a Zoom moment there, Joseph.
Yes.
I thought it was my daughter telling me off for doing something or saying something wrong.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And
Aaron, could I just
your...
add, just based on something Joseph was saying, I've just put in the chat at Rosen College, we produce twice a year. Well, we publish twice a year a translation of our academic work in what we call the Rosen Research Review. And this is actually sponsored and funded by industry. I'm not allowed to tell you how much, but we get quite a bit of money from somebody who supports our translation. And it's actually done with a company based in Bristol in the UK, but it's been really, 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 really helpful in getting the word out about the college, getting the research out. And it's just, feel free to read some of the material in your own time, but it's translated in everyday speak. So it's just part of the battle, but it's something that we've worked hard on. And Joseph, I know Stephen Pratt, he's the room opposite me now. He's doing podcasts every day for you. So I know he's working hard.
Thanks, Alan and Joseph, for your insights. And clearly the conversation is widening, this inclusivity of the response and the audience in which we seek to reach outside of just the readers of the paper or the journal. Last but not least, I'll go to Catheryn. Catheryn, for your comments around impact, and obviously you've got questions around whether people engage with industry and in what format. So over to you for your comments.
Thank you, Aaron. Yeah, I asked that question because I wanted to see how many people have attended industry relevant conferences or webinars in the last 6 months. And I think the responses are pretty good, actually. So a lot of you are attending industry conferences. So the next question then is, where is your, how do you then, how do you get them to know that you are doing research in this area that is relevant to them? So do you ask them questions, and when you go to some of these presentations, do you see where your research is placed in where people are talking about, where the topic is trending, for example? Do you talk to them about your research, and do they see relevance in your research? Because a lot of times when I talk to my industry partners, and whenever they have conferences and I recommend colleagues to speak, my industry partners' eyes glaze over, because it's like, oh, not another professor, or can this professor actually say something that is relevant to the mainstream audience? So a lot of times we also speak in a language that doesn't resonate with industry. We speak our very academic jargon, and so when we translate it, and I echo what Joseph said, think of all the different channels that you can translate your academic findings into. So we talked about, so Ellen, you talked about your, this, how you translated it, but yeah, and Joseph did the podcast, but there's so many other media, Instagram, LinkedIn posts. If you can write, if I can challenge everyone today to, if you have a LinkedIn post, or, even in your Facebook post, and if your Facebook has your industry partners in it or industry people in it, write down, just write a short post, like 3 things tourism businesses should know about whatever it is you're doing. So if you're into wellness tourism, for example, 3 things tourism businesses should know about wellness tourism, or 3 things, if I want to appeal to the Singapore Tourism Board, for example, if they are my potential, like if I want to get a consultancy from them, I'll say, 3 things the Singapore government should know, or Singapore Tourism Board should know about wellness tourism. And those three things must come from the findings of your paper on wellness tourism, your latest study, for example. And you put in these three things. If they can respond, if you can get industry people to respond to you, it means that you have been successful in writing, in translating your research findings into layman terms. And if you can do that, if people start responding to you, that means they're paying attention to you and they're listening. And this is where it's so important, right? Like we talk about managerial implications in our paper, but more importantly, it's like, what do these managerial implications do for industry? How do they help the people that we're meant to help, that people we research for, whether it's tourism businesses or the travelers themselves or governments or policies? So how do we actually help them? You know, after you translate, then what is the next step? Are you going to, you know, write into a policy document, into a government report? What is the next step? So when Cathy talked about the long-term impact, I think we as academics need to think alongside that. And that's when, you know, good researchers start to also win contracts to consultancies with some of these government organizations or destinations or businesses.
Thank you. Thank you for your insights and also understanding a bit of the industry trends and contemporary areas to be able to engage in an ongoing manner. We are quite privileged. Many people have presented their views here from the editors, and I wanted to open perhaps this time to the floor for people to post comments or queries here in the chat, or if you wanted to unmic yourself and speak up, feel free to pose a question to the editors-in-chief in the room.
Can I just offer a thought, Aaron? And I think it was something that Catheryn said that I thought was a really good point, actually. Academics, by nature, we tend to preach quite a lot. We're not always very good at listening. And particularly with industry people, sometimes we just have to be a little bit more patient listening to what they're saying and then process. I've seen so many people, you jump in. Sometimes just sit back, listen a little bit, and then you can actually frame your questions and what have you that we alluded to earlier. And I think the other point that I took, I think it was Cathy mentioned it, the short, medium and long term. If you force yourself to write a short, medium and long term impact, you may not get it right first time, but it just gives you a timeline that really forces you to try and confront, you know, the sort of projection or the trajectory of the impact that may be there. So that's something I don't always get it right, Cathy. It's a good point.
I think also because of the demands placed on us as researchers, right? We often start a research project with, you know, a publication in mind, or, you know, a grant in mind, and we almost massage our grant application to the grant aim rather than starting from the point of the end users. Who is my research going to be helping? Who is it going to be impacting? And starting from them, almost echoing what Marianna said earlier about, you know, start at the start. Who do you think this paper is going to help, and who do you want to help? And that, I think that's important to begin with. And it sounds like common sense, but it's something that we take for granted and we don't normally do.
Thank you. We do have a question in the chat from Anita. Her question is talking about practical implications, but what would you as editors view on publishing with industry as co-authors? Is this something that's accepted, welcome, encouraged? Your thoughts? Marianna?
I would totally encourage collaboration with industry, and not only to write a paper, but to design, implement, and fully execute a study. I mentioned before, you need to start thinking about implications at the right beginning. And as many other editors mentioned as well, it's really important to listen to the industry, think and be placed in their own shoes, you know, think like the end user, like an industry person or even a tourist, to try to see why you need to do a research beyond the fact that you simply want a publication. You really need to collaborate with industry to collect the data, even interpreting the data and going back to the industry and say, look, this is what I found, this is what my conclusions are. Do you agree? Or do you think I have interpreted findings correct? And do you think my suggestions are fruitful? So collaboration with the industry, I think, is very important through the whole stages of a research study, not only to brainstorm ideas or to write a paper, but to fully implement the research. I think people from the industry, they can be very useful contributors for every stage. And I would fully support this. In JHDM, I think explicitly in the description of the journal, we make evident that we do welcome joint publications with industry or people from industry as well. The problem, in inverted commas, or the difficulty that somebody might face, is that industry tends to write in a different language or to write in a different writing style. And this is probably what we also need to take in consideration. We are discussing here how people and how researchers can make a practical implication. Sometimes, to be honest, and very frequent as well, there are many studies, they do have practical implications, but authors are struggling to easily communicate this or to make it evident through their writing style. This also demotivates industry to read publications and papers that we write. And probably a suggestion I may have is try to condense or to do the 5 minutes exercise. If you're going to communicate your study to an industry audience, how are you going to summarize it in 5 lines or 5 minutes? If you're able to do it, then I'm sure you are really pretty clear how to write the practical implications in an academic paper as well.
Thank you for your comments. I've got Mustafa with your hand raised. Over to you, Mustafa.
Yeah, actually, I have a question. Good afternoon, everyone. We talk about practical implication and thinking about the people that want to use the result of research from the beginning. But you know, in academia, we have pressure for publication, and now is publication in top-tier journal. And publishing in top-tier journal, all the editor that now we have in this panel, one of the main criteria for publication in top-tier journal always is theoretical contribution. Practical implication and some point for industry actually come in second priority or maybe third priority. So my question is there any possibility for top-tier journal to open one type of publication that focus more on industry and practical implication instead of theoretical contribution? So people can generate, still they can publish in this top-tier journal, but in other line, and in this type of paper, they focus on only practical implication and some lessons or some actually advices or something for industry, not in theoretical contribution and knowledge creation.
Thank you, Mustafa. I might open this question to Peter. Peter, from your perspective, are there different paper submission types that the journal accepts in your
Yeah,
experience?
as far as I know, there were, in history, we used to have Cornell, Hospitality Quarterly, which traditionally emphasized the importance of practical values. And I think I could be wrong, but past editors, heavily emphasized practical values of a research paper, and they really enforced that policy. And I think something wrong, took place, that changes. But correct me if I'm wrong. So, but it's my understanding that practical values and theoretical values is not totally different. If you have some theoretical valuable topic, it must have a certain practical values. And I think a professor Cathy just mentioned, I think a typical problem is very simple. They write up practical value which has nothing to do with their findings. They're just generic and just to talk about their personal opinion. I think that's the real issue in terms of practical values. And also, I think Mustafa's suggestion to have industry focused some paper. We do have trade journal, and we do have industry focused outlets. If we create a new publication type or sort of publications which focuses on practical value only, it'll be very difficult to assess quality of contributions. I think a theoretical contribution can be understood in different ways. I would say validity of findings. If there is no academic rigor, it is very difficult to determine the validity of findings. So I would say we careful practically relevant topic and information in our submission. However, I'm not quite sure if we have to create a new type of publication which only focuses on practical values. That's all from me. Thank you.
Aaron, can I jump in there? I agree.
Yeah, go for it.
I agree with Peter. Hi, Peter. I agree with Peter because we already have trade journals, industry journals, but also government reports. So if you want to do research that are targeted to industry, then why are we publishing in academic journals? It doesn't make sense to write a practical implication paper that is focused on practical implication, but then we target it to academics. So if you want to target the industry, then the better way actually is to, write a quick proposal. And this proposal, it's like a slide deck, a pitch to industry. So think about who this might help. It could be, say, UNWTO, or it could be Toyota, it could be any destination, right? And just pitch to these people, just send them your slide deck. And then say what is it you want to do, and say how much you need from them. And so they can commission that research to you, and you'll find yourself writing a white paper or a report. And instead of you spending all your time going through reviews with reviewers and going through all the rounds and not getting a single cent, you now get to publish an industry report and get paid $50,000. So I think it's more efficient on time that way. It's better for your CV. You're more relevant. You're making impact. I think that would be my way to go. Well, that has been my way to go.
Thank you. And indeed, on recollection, there are some journals with different submission types. Technical papers, industry viewpoints, research notes, and so on, just dedicated to a range of readership, and perhaps papers in the pipeline that may not be necessarily at the level of a full paper for that. But there are important points that have been mentioned, and I see as well the chat's been talking about not a dichotomy of either one or the other. And Katie, your point of how it should be both theory and managerial practices discussed within the context of the paper.
Yeah, I think why we're discussing practical implications or the impact here is because advancement contribution to theory, that's taken for granted. That's what we have to do. And beyond that, that's why we're looking at probably the weaker understanding of the tools. I think that's the reason why we're focusing on the practical part today.
Thank you. And Any other questions?
Yeah, Aaron, I was just going to agree with Cathy there. I think probably most of the time, the theoretical contribution, yes, it can always be better, but generally that's not the problem. The problem 90% of the time with the submissions we get is the practical implications. So I think there tends to be a fear of the theoretical contributions, but most authors, they know the literature well, they know the general body of work. It's the practical stuff that they really struggle with. So, you know, that's why I think it's a really good idea to have this today, because you don't tend to get panels on the practical implications. So yeah, the theory, yeah, it can always be better, but it's not the big problem as far as we're concerned.
Thank you.
If I may, and I will try to be a little bit
Go on.
critical. I will fully agree with everything. I mean, in same HTM, we also face the same issue. It's very easy, in inverted commas, for authors to justify the theoretical implication, irrespective of how sufficient the justification is, but we see authors being able to identify a gap or do a literature review and say this is what is missing and that's what new we're contributing. Authors are mainly struggling in terms of practical implications and how to phrase them. However, what I would like to really emphasize, and I think and I hope all editors can support me on that, to motivate people to do research, not for just research and a publication. We also really need to motivate and reward behavior towards that approach. And so far, because of the system, because of the way that things work, because of the pressure of people to publish, we tend to give a lot of emphasis on measuring impact based on citations and impact factors. This is not the way that we can create change or we can direct scholars to make a real impact. Not that citations or impact factors are not important, they are, but believe me, do you think there is a correlation between impact factor of a journal or a citation of a paper and how many managers are reading it and finding useful? I think we really need to move beyond that. I'm sure all editors are trying to move beyond that. I don't think it's only at the power of every editor or every author to change the system, but I think every one of us would need to think beyond impact measured by citations and impact factors. If we try to think differently, maybe conducting research beyond that impact can be easier.
Thank you for your comments, Marianna.
I mean, practically, even for career development, especially for the young scholars here, more and more agencies now, when they call for research proposals, they will want to know the short-term, medium, long-term impact. So before they give you the funding, they want to know, why are you doing the study? What good does it do to the society, to the community, to the country? So that will, I understand, for example, in the UK and certainly in the case of Hong Kong, when we want to propose something for government funding, we have to demonstrate the real life impact. And we have to demonstrate not only the potential impact, but how we will engage with the community and make sure that the impact we claim that could happen will actually happen. So it's not just, yes, we want to get things published, but even before you get the research started, I think more and more funding agencies, maybe in other parts of the world in the future, will also require us to think about what impact will our study make.
Yeah, and that's exactly the same in the US as well. So the NSF, which is the National Science Foundation over here, is exactly the same, Cathy, and it's actually getting tougher.
Yeah.
And it's one of those where we tend to start on the impact first and reverse engineer the proposal, because if you can't get the impact right, you don't get anything. So no, it's becoming tougher, which I think is a good thing, actually, because it's forcing you to think, you know, what really are you doing and why?
Yeah, here in New Zealand, we do have national, research assessment system, which is called Performance-Based Research Fund, PBRF. Every 6 years, every single academic in tertiary education is assessed in terms of their research impact. And in few years, we are going to have another, new round. I think they are currently in a shift or changes in, performance, criteria from academic citations to real impacts. And that's why, have you heard about dimensions and art metrics? These are, data sources to measure the impact or social impact or, any, social media or different, level of impacts of particular research outputs. And I think that the key is, how we take care of, our academics. As Mustafa mentioned, tenure evaluation process, academic publication and also citation really matters to justify quality of research. I think that this is a fundamental issue. As Marianna mentions, there must be some, movements. I think it's government level or different people who actually reward or compensate, all researchers. Otherwise, nothing would happen. But as we can see, all part of the world have been changing, to assessing, quality of research in different ways. So I guess, practical values, obviously, in maybe considering AI or new technology, I would say, AI would truly assess real impact of research, paper in near future. So I just look forward to, seeing, what's going on in the future.
Thanks, Peter, and all the editors for your comments. I think at the back of what's happening is the changing landscape by even publishers like Hill and Francis, Elsevier, Emerald, to look at this from the wider societal impacts, linking research to potentially you might have seen things like the SDG, for example, and showing how one's research is aligned to one of the 17 SDGs or perhaps more than that. In our last couple of minutes, I wanted for you to perhaps provide your final words to the audience of where you see impact moving forward. I might start with you, Alan.
I lost my mouse there for a moment, Aaron. We've only been doing this for 2 years. Where's my mouse gone? Yeah. I think you just mentioned the most important point then, Aaron, in your introduction to the final summary. This is just going to get bigger and bigger. And I alluded to the fact that the NSF and the research grants here in the States, that final section used to be quite small. It's just getting bigger and bigger every year. So the value, the worth, the dissemination as well. So the dissemination of your work post findings is hugely important. This is just going to get bigger and bigger. But so I think it just reinforces the importance for everybody to really think very, very carefully. Why are they doing the study that they're doing? And I put in the chat there solutions rather than citations. And it's easier when you're a little bit older, like I am, because you've got the citations in the bag, so to speak. But I really do believe if you're going to survive longer term, you have to think beyond the citations, because it is a very long-term career, and to really get underneath the skin of the industry or the issues, you really need to understand the dynamics that are going on. So be patient. Get stuck into the real issues and really get out and about. And I think I was at Catheryn, that quite a few people have been to industry events. I think that helps hugely, just listening to different people with different opinions, with different priorities. Not everybody thinks like us. Take those on board, and I think you're far better off for it at the end of the day. But be patient.
Thanks, Alan. Catheryn, your final words?
I think I just want to leave people with this thought. If you suddenly lose your job in academia, or if you graduate tomorrow and you cannot get a job in academia, will industry take you in and give you a job just based on your research. Just based on the research work that you're doing, are you able to convince industry that it is important enough, that is impactful enough for them to give you a job? Because I think that's a good reflection question to begin with. I will leave you with that.
Thanks, Catheryn. Peter?
Yeah, my final word is quite simple. Thank you, Marianna, and this symposium to have me. And out of this, conversations, I thought about, what really matters. And also it's good, reminder for myself. And I learned out of, talking and also listening to all of you. And all the best, for this symposium. Thanks.
Thanks, Peter. Cathy?
I will echo an earlier comment that talk to the stakeholders early on in the research process to bounce off some ideas. Don't just dream up a research topic with the door closed in your office. We need to go out and about. And a perfect example is, I think it was last year, a year and a half ago, some of my colleagues and myself, we came up with a brilliant research idea about using Hotel Icon, our university-owned teaching and research hotel. But then the general manager's comment after listening to our idea, and he said, "Why do you do it? I will not use the results." So that basically killed our brilliant idea, which is good. At least we didn't have to go through the process and at the end finding out that it's not a good idea. So yeah, go outside and talk to the real people and see if they can use the results of your study.
Thanks, Katie. Finally, Marianna, your comments.
Thank you, Aaron. For those that they have me as a friend in Twitter, you might see that I define myself as a practicing researcher and a researching practitioner. What I basically want to say is what Catheryn said. I'm trying to do things that they're useful for both sides, get inspired from the academics to do research, but also be a practitioner. I've started from the industry myself that doesn't only reinvent the wheel, but it does also contribute something to theory. It's not something easy that people can do, but the more flexible you become and diversifiable, if you lose your job from the one sector, you can easily go to the other because you do add value to both sides. Otherwise, you might end up in a situation whereby you go to a discussion with professionals and you are boring. You talk to them and they don't listen to you because you have nothing to contribute, and vice versa. You are an industry person that you go to academics, you talk your own language, and the academics thinks that, oh, you're just a waiter, or I don't know how academics might see practitioners, that you're not a valuable person. So I think we both need to have a balance, and we both need to be in the shoes of each other and try to contribute the best that we can.
Thank you, Marianna, and thank you to all editors-in-chief here, Cathy, Peter, Catheryn, Alan, Joseph, Marianna. Thank you for your time, and to our audience as well for your inputs and for your contributions. We will end this particular session. The next session will start in 15 minutes with a keynote from our speaker from Tourism Fiji. We'll see you shortly.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you, everybody.